Hello, Paul from the YouTube channel PF JUNG. I've seen some of your videos, I've heard some of your takes, and I thought it could be interesting to talk to you. You've obviously had, well, I guess you would say pretty takes that could be considered controversial regarding the whole Judaism, Israel, Palestine, all that. So I would like to ask you some questions about that, and hopefully we can have a good discussion here, and maybe both of
Yeah,
us can.
that works. I will say anything can be considered controversial nowadays, so it's not
That's
adding
true.
much by pointing that out. Can I ask you a question to start though
Oh,
first?
of course.
Um, would, how would you place yourself on the political spectrum, so to speak, when it comes to the Israel-Palestine thing? Are you center left, center
So,
right, far left?
so here's the thing. I don't. Okay, so you're asking me, I guess, from an American perspective.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking in Israeli perspective, but I don't really fit neatly anywhere. I think I haven't really given it much thought. I'm not a very political person. I don't think about it all too much. I think about ideas. I think about geopolitical situations, maybe. Uh, but I guess if you had to put me in an American, well, what would you call what? How would you call it? Would you call the right to be more pro-Israel? Like how would you
Well,
define it? I don't
no,
even know.
that's the problem. So
Yeah, because the
I guess
far right and the
maybe
far left are both
correct.
very hostile to Israel, but for different reasons.
Right. Well, so then maybe put it in an Israeli context. So if in my understanding of the Israeli spectrum is far right is very sort of like on the extreme far right in Israel is the ethno-supremacist, this is our land, racial superiority type stuff. And then the far left in Israel, do they want to just dissolve Israel itself? Are they working with Hamas? Like, so in that spectrum,
Okay, so I'll have to. I just have to mention. I'm not going to get too much into it, but you've kind of
sure.
strawmanned the right wing Israeli position, I believe. But that's okay.
That's
let's
fair.
let's not get into
Well,
that.
yeah, I'm talking about the extreme poles.
I think the extreme. That was also like, but whatever.
Okay,
Let's not get into that.
sure.
Here's the thing in Israel. The divide between right and left about the war right now is actually not about like what should we do with Israel? Are we pro-Israel or pro-Palestine? That's really not the debate at all.
It's the hostage situation, right?
Exactly. It's more a debate about facts. I'll put it this way. Um, I would guess this might not be a very accurate representation, but I'll try anyway. The left believes that Israel pretty much has no more interest in going into Gaza and in dismantling Hamas, either because it's incapable of doing it, or because the hostages are more important, or whatever. Many reasons. Okay, so the left believes that ceasefire should be reached immediately so that the war ends, Bibi gets kicked out, and the hostages are freed. Although I think that this is like a very romantic view. Although I guess you could blame the right of the same vices here, right? Because Hamas is not going to release all the hostages. That's never going to happen. So we can discuss it later if you want. So this is the left. Like it's not really a political opinion. It's more like an opinion about facts. That's why politics
Sure.
are so stupid, because you think you're
I
ideologically
agree.
opposed, but
Yeah.
you just believe in a different set of facts based on your political affiliation. Like it's the other way around.
Yep.
So while on the right, the view is that you can't really have a good hostage deal, and that continuing the military operations is well in Israel's best interest, and that Israel is dismantling Hamas and is capable of continuing to do so. And basically, so it's a division in facts, right? One side believes that it's a fact that Israel has nothing more to achieve in Gaza, and the other side believes that, well, the opposite essentially. So,
That's fair.
and it's kind of stupid, because you're like, you would expect people to look at evidence and then decide what the facts are and then align politically. But in reality, we see the opposite. We see people deciding upon the facts based on their political
Yeah.
affiliations. So I don't
I was gonna say
know. Yeah,
you might expect that. I par for the course now of, well, we'll figure out which tribe we're on first and then decide what's true. But yeah.
yeah. So well, I guess it doesn't come as a huge surprise really to anyone. But
Yeah.
when I said it was surprising, I guess I meant it like that it should be surprising, though it isn't.
Right. Yeah. Ideally.
So yeah, where do I place in myself? Um, it
Well,
seems,
even because in that, like, and I don't have a particular opinion on that specific debate.
yeah,
I guess more I I use right, like I believe right wing and left wing can apply to philosophy and sort of underlying temperaments,
yeah.
right? Like, you can be like Rousseau versus Hobbes sort of falls on a right wing, left wing kind of perspective. So, and most of my controversial criticism, let's say, of Israel and Judaism is on that spectrum of, well, when I say far right, I mean extreme religious, like the extreme religious Zionist, or far left. I don't have my, I'm aware of the accusations against the far left that they, I think, aided Hamas. Whether or not that's true, that would be on the philosophical side of, well, are there far left Israelis who want to dissolve the state of Israel? I don't actually know. Um, I'm sure the right would accuse them of existing. But I guess, and we can get into whatever questions you have, but yeah, I'm less, I don't have an opinion. I actually wouldn't want to offer an opinion on, well, what is the how that Israel should do when it comes to like freeing the hostages or something like that. I guess it's more on the broader just issue of Israel's relationship to the United States, the role that Orthodox Judaism plays in um, the geopolitical attitudes that Americans have towards Israel, and so on and so forth.
Okay, so let's get right into that.
Let's do
Uh,
it.
so can you criticize Judaism for me? What do you mean when I've heard you use phrases like Jewish supremacy and stuff like that. So can you do that for me so that we can discuss it? I want you to phrase your views, and then I will try
Yeah,
to repeat them back to you so that you can make sure I've understood them.
I believe that all religions are worthy of criticism. I believe that fundamentalist Christianity is cancerous when it denies science, when it says the earth is 6,000 years old, when it doesn't, denies teaching evolution, when it uh, says that gay people will go to hell simply for being who they are. That's cancerous. Fundamentalist Islam is cancerous for, I think, for reasons I don't even need to go into. The implementation of Sharia law is backwards from my perspective. And then extreme religious Zionism that says God gave a specific piece of land to a specific ethnicity, and therefore foreign policy should be oriented around that. I think that's problematic. I think people like Ben Gvir is the archetypal example of a Jewish supremacist who said explicitly the rights of him and his family to walk around the West Bank matter more than the Arabs, stuff like that. Among the many things that you could quote Ben Gvir or Bezalel Smotrich. So I'm against that nonsense, the extreme forms of any religion. And Judaism in particular is obviously at the center of the Israel-Palestine conflict, along with fundamentalist Islam. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So okay, I'm not gonna get too much into that Smotrich and Ben Gvir things, but because I know the quotes that you've cited, but I don't really know the context, or I don't know it well enough. I know many Israeli people do, but I really don't care that much about politics. So I can discuss the
Okay,
ideas in general.
sure.
So here's the thing: when you criticize, when you say criticizing a religion, historically, if we try to apply this to Judaism, there are several ways to do this. Okay, so historically, so the first and most obvious, and I believe also the most legitimate, and that nobody, I don't think I don't think anyone really has a huge issue with that, is a theological criticism. Like, for example, let's say a Christian would say, well, here are all the proofs that I believe Jesus is the Son of God, or God itself, God himself, and thus Judaism is wrong, blah, blah, blah. Like, right? That's a criticism of Judaism. Also, you can do the same from a Muslim perspective, and you could also do the same from an atheist perspective, although it would look fundamentally different if you did that. It wouldn't be like, well, Jesus or Muhammad or Allah, whatever. It would be more like, look, these beliefs are rubbish, and here are the reasons why I think that. Okay, so that's criticism number one. I don't think anyone will blame you of being anti-Semitic if you did that, right?
Well, some would, but
Yeah, I
most
guess some
reasonable
would.
people would not. Yeah,
I guess some would.
sure.
But yeah, reasonable people would not. So that's criticism number one. Historically, criticism number two is the 20th century criticism of Judaism, which is viewing Judaism as an ethnic group and criticizing the race, essentially. Right.
Sure. Yeah.
We've seen this, of course, in Europe about 100 years ago, and we're seeing some emergence of this today also.
Yeah.
So this is option number two. Now, the funny thing is, there's also option number three. And option number three is, there's also number four, we'll get to that. But number three is, you say, for example, okay, I'll do it to Islam, and then maybe you'll understand what I'm trying to get at here.
Okay.
You can say something like, the core beliefs of Islam have some problematic tenets in it that make Muslims more likely to behave a certain way, which I think are very bad for, well, the grand narrative of human civilization or something like that, right? So you could say, well, I can go to the Quran and I can look at all these passages and all these things, and I see that Muslims who are religious tend to behave in a certain way, or to have a certain worldview that really is quite incoherent with everything that I believe to be good and ethical. So if you apply this to Judaism, that I think that might be kind of where you land, right? Because you could say the tenet of like believing that the Almighty Creator of the universe promised you, an ethno-religious group, a specific piece of land, and you believe that it gives you justification to do all kinds of shit. So that's a problem. Do you see what
Yes,
I did?
that's 100%
Okay, so
what I believe.
Okay, so that's kind of similar to the criticism that many people have about Islam. It's similar,
Yeah.
but it comes from a different.
It's probably the same. I would have that same criticism of Islam.
Yeah. Okay. So me too, by the way. So.
And Christianity, for that matter, like the young Earth creationists who deny science and believe, and are extremely homophobic and all that stuff.
Yeah, but that would also apply to religious Judaism and Islam in the exact same
True.
way. Okay.
True. Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. So I guess maybe you could say, if you wanted to take it into Christianity, you could say that maybe, I don't know. Well, I don't know enough, but maybe this whole notion of the belief in afterlife, that, well, you just burn that guy or this woman, and if she's okay, she will go to heaven, and if she's not okay.
Sure. Yeah, there's definite, or like Catholicism, obviously, with like its problems with the priests are very specific. And I could point to the Catholic doctrine that causes all these abuses in the church. I think that's problematic. So we can say that.
So that's criticism number three. Maybe we can come up with a sexy name for it eventually. But
Sure.
The interesting thing is that the second type of criticism, the racial criticism, kind of emerges out of the third type of criticism. Why? Because if you believe that the Jews believe that they're a chosen people or something like that, a chosen ethnicity, because Judaism is an ethno-religion in a sense. It's not concerned with spreading itself to more believers and stuff like that. It's an ethnic. You can convert, but mostly Jews
It's not
don't
encouraged.
want.
Yeah.
Jews don't want you to convert. Essentially, you'll have to work real hard to do that.
Yeah.
So So I believe that the racial criticism is quite linked to this kind of criticism. Because you could say, well, look, it's very easy to make the move and say, look, the Jews as a race, they're not a problem. They're not a problem as a race, but they tend to hold beliefs that are very detrimental to the development of, I don't know, a peaceful Middle East, call it. Okay, so this could be another type of criticism. And the fourth type of criticism is excessive criticism of the Jewish state, right? And that's the newest out of all the criticisms. Well, maybe it's also old, right? But people didn't have TikTok to criticize the Kingdom of Israel 2,000 years ago. So
Not that we know of. Yeah.
yeah, probably not. So your criticism fits more neatly into like the third category of like these people tend to hold beliefs that are problematic. Would you say that this is correct?
Well, I don't know. So fundamentally, I separate Jewish. This is starting off. We just have a fundamental problem of definitions. It's like, well, what is Jewish people will disagree. Like, can you be a Jewish atheist?
No. Like
Okay.
like oh no, wait. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I've heard rabbis say, no, of course you can't be a Jew. Jewish rabbis have said there's no such thing as a Jewish atheist.
No, okay.
So
Let me clarify that for a second.
Okay,
If
go
a
ahead.
rabbi said that, what he meant is that the person who says he's an atheist is not really an atheist. That's what he means. It doesn't mean that he's no longer a Jew. He means that he's not really an atheist. That's what he would mean if he said that.
Okay, and I'm as a former Jordan Peterson fan, I'm sympathetic to that perspective. I have a lot of um, Jordan Peterson's perspectives when it comes to religion being sort of inseparable from psychology and how everyone is religious. But like Sam Harris is Jewish,
Mm.
and he is a famous atheist.
Yeah.
So is Sam Harris Jewish,
Yes.
but he's not an atheist?
No. I think he is an atheist.
Okay.
But I believe that if you would ask, like the rabbi who said that, the rabbi would say that Sam Harris is Jewish. That's what I'm trying to tell you.
Yeah, okay, I get that. Yeah, that's fair. I guess from my perspective, the way I see it is there is this is just independent, this is just true in general. There is someone's racial identity, and then there is someone's belief system.
Hmm.
One is biological, one is cultural. They're fundamentally separate. They correlate. So, like, for example, the last name Chong correlates with or let's say Zhang. The last name Zhang correlates with Chinese race, like the Chinese race, right?
Yeah.
Most people who have the last name Zhang are going to be Chinese. But a woman could marry an Asian man or a Chinese man with the last name Zhang. A white woman could marry a man with the last name Zhang, and she could have the last name Zhang. So fundamentally, they're separable, even though they generally correlate. So in my mind, there is nothing about having of being racially Jewish that predisposes you to believe in any set of ideas. Like in terms of biology, there's no biological mechanism other than, well, it correlates that people who are, Jewish are going to be more likely to be raised in Jewish households. It's in the same thing with it's like black people and being Democrat. Like 90% of black people vote Democrat in the United States. But there's nothing in the genes of black people that predispose them to vote Democrat, right?
Yeah.
So that's how I see, and maybe this is even a first obstacle that is controversial, perhaps, is like that's how I see a lot. Like I believe Gabor Mate is atheist, Sam Harris is atheist, Norman Finkelstein I suspect is atheist. Otherwise, he's definitely going to hell. Although in Judaism they don't believe in hell, correct?
I think they don't.
Okay. Are you atheist or are you religious or?
I'm neither. I guess
Okay.
I guess if you look at what I do, I'm more religious than atheist. So,
That's
but
fair. I'm Christian adjacent. I don't consider myself full Christian just yet,
okay.
and maybe never will be. But do you get how I'm seeing it? Whether or not
Yeah.
that's how maybe your audience and you
No,
conceptualize it. This
no.
is how I conceptualize it.
I think that's fair. Okay, that's fair to say as an analysis. But how does that? I mean, I see what this argument is supposed to do. It's supposed uh, to contextualize your criticism of Judaism as only in the idea sense, like if there is zero racist or ethnically based criticisms. Like this is what this
Well,
argument is meant to do.
yeah, but of course the complexity is that the 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 ethno-supremacist strains of Judaism that like manifest in the subtler movement or the Jewish Power Party, it's like that's an idea that centers around the ethnicity. So there is like the idea, it's like what it's like Aryan supremacy.
So here's the
Like that's an
thing.
idea, but it focuses on a racial group as well.
I'd like to. What would you say if I told you that I believe I don't have the data, right? But I'm quite certain that this is true.
Okay.
I believe that at least a third of the people who vote for these parties that you associate with Jewish ethno supremacy do not believe that the creator of the cosmos literally promised their people a specific piece of land.
Well, then we get into the Jordan Peterson rabbit hole of, well, they might. Well, okay, actually, I don't even have to go there yet. I could see that. Like for example, after October 7th, it's very easy for me to understand why people would move right in their why Israelis would move right and vote for say, well, I don't like Ben Gvir normally, but I'll pick him because he's the most vocal about, removing the Palestinians from Gaza or something like that. And if there's a security argument to be made, then that's perfectly reasonable to understand why people would shift in that direction.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to get at here is that I don't think that this idea of ethnic supremacy, I don't think it's as prevalent as you think it is. I would. It does exist. I have seen people talk like the Jews are the best thing, that they have true souls or whatever, but it's extremely fringe, extremely fringe in Israeli ideas and politics. And I think a good way to contextualize this actually is that the people who founded the Jewish state were atheists, right? I don't know how much you know about that, but the
Yeah, Theodore
first,
Herzl. Well,
yeah.
this gets into the Jordan Peterson rabbit hole. Is like they're atheists, but like the rabbi said, they're not really atheists, right?
Okay, great. So the thing is, so now we have, okay, they don't literally believe that God promised them this land, but they have a common narrative that has sustained itself over several thousand years in the diaspora. And this narrative has led them to believe that they have a special connection to a special piece of land, and they have, well, essentially in 48 been successful in reconquering it, right? That's what you could call it. It's a reconquest.
Sure.
So
Sure.
is that also like a problem with Jewish ideas? Like, would you still fit that whole story into your criticism of Judaism, and that, well, Judaism has a problematic story because the story has led them to aggress on a specific, I don't know, piece of land?
Um, I don't know. I'd have to think about it because Theodore Herzl suggested Uganda and Argentina, right, as other places they could have gone theoretically. So if they were on,
So actually, I
go ahead.
didn't think exclusively of Theodor Herzl. There was
Okay.
a whole drama with the Zionists, but I didn't exactly mean Herzl. I mean literally even after Herzl, the people who led the Zionist movement and the people who basically ran Israel before it was Israel, uh, they were almost communists. They were socialists, socialist
Sure.
Jews from Russia, right? And that's the
Sure.
like the whole. I think up till like 70, was it 75? I think up till 75 for like the first 30 years of Israel's existence, it was ran by a socialist party. These
Sure.
people were not religious. They were not ethno supremacists,
Well, that's where,
or
so
as you.
this is what I was talking about with the Jordan Peterson. First off, you can be religious, you can be a religious Jew and not be ethno-supremacist. I want to make that clear. Like
Okay.
they're perfectly, and I would say I would suspect and most Jewish religious people when it's the whole God's chosen people idea. It's like, well, does that mean that we're better than other people? It's like, no, it means that we have a responsibility to be a light in the world. And it's like you can very easily come up with and live out a very positive interpretation um, of that belief. The same is true with Islam. There are moderate Muslims, but and this and you know and there are Catholic priests who do not engage in abuse, but you still have to look at the underlying doctrine and say when there are manifestations of negative behavior, like is it like how much can we tie it to the underlying doctrine?
Okay, so I
And like
have
with
to
go
I have
ahead.
to interject here about with two things. First of all,
Yeah.
I think it's a problem. Like when you say, yeah, there's this problem of Jewish supremacy, and there's also a problem in Islam. But I think it's kind of unfair to say this. I mean, it's
Because the
technically true.
proportions are different.
Exactly, the proportions are vastly different. So
Sure.
that's number
But
one.
my
And while it's
go
technically
ahead.
true, it's kind of unfair. You know, it's true, but it's kind of unfair to point that out as
Well, I
something that is
guess
meaningful.
here's what I'm let's see. Um okay, and maybe we just help to go down this route because this is just more clear. So like for example, as an American, this is my default stance. I don't know why we support Israel to the degree that we do, and I have not heard a compelling case that we should, for example, get involved in a war with Iran if it turns into that. This gets into all kinds of geopolitics and stuff.
Yeah, that's a different
Now,
argument.
fair
That's
enough, exactly,
oh,
exactly. So that is my like when you say it's like I'm not trying to compare Jewish supremacy to Islamic supremacy for the sake of um I don't know, trying to draw an equivalency there that might not actually exist. It's like I'm laying out the reasons why fundamentally I have this other attitude that is more prescient. But like, um, Ben Gavir got what is it, 10-20% of the
I think
what's the
it's
Jewish Power Party vote?
about 10%, but it's actually
10%.
5% because it's two parties that have merged.
That's fair. Okay. Ben Gavir is so tell me if you disagree with this. Ben Gavir is as bad as any Hamas sympathizer. That's what I
Um,
believe.
no, I don't think so. Like I don't know enough about Ben Gvir, but I
Okay,
would say no.
fair enough. So when I see the Jewish people shout death to Arabs, and when I see Ben Gavir had a shrine to Baruch Goldstein in his living room,
Oh yeah, that.
that
Okay, that's bad.
what's his name? Naftali Bennett, who's no left winger, said Ben Gavir, that's too far right. You have to take it down if you want to merge with our party. And Ben Gavir reluctantly took it down.
No.
So like that's Ben Gavir, that's the head of the Jewish Power Party. And let's say it's 10%. Naftali Bennett, the fact that he merged with them. It's like I try to draw the equivalency of the United States.
Wait, did Naftali
If
Bennett merge with them? I can't remember. I think the merger was after Naftali Bennett.
maybe, yeah,
Actually, I
you
don't
might be
think
right.
Naftali
It
Bennett
might have
merged.
been the religious
It was
Zionist
Smotrich.
party.
It was Smotrich who
Yeah,
merged with
correct.
them.
Now Smotrich is not also much better than Ben Gavir. Maybe a little bit because he didn't have a shrine to a mass shooter in his living room. But I just want to contextualize, and then I'll let you come back. But like, just from my perspective as an American who doesn't know much about this conflict, obviously, I don't know anything about anything really. But like, the Minister of National Security in Israel had a shrine to a mass shooter. Now, if Donald Trump or if the American Secretary of State had a shrine to Dylan Roof in his living room, the kid who walked into I don't know exactly where it was. I think it was in South Carolina, maybe a church and shot up a bunch of black people. If a U.S. if the equivalent of the Minister of National Security had a shrine to a mass shooter, then every single criticism that the left would have about how America's white supremacist, I would say, yeah, I'm going to have to agree with now, because that's insane beyond all belief. So the fact that anyone would vote for Ben Gavir is scary. As you know, the Nazis had what, 3% of the vote in 1933?
Three? No, it wasn't 3%. It was
I think
it, Oh, okay, okay.
And then maybe
And then it grew.
1931.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
it was like 3%, and then 2 years later it was like 40%.
Yeah.
So the idea that it's a small number of people, it's like fair enough, that's relevant, but historically, that by no means eliminates the severity of the issue. And just in a pure ideological, evaluating the ideas on their face of it, Ben Gvir is, I say, degenerate and disgusting for that type of stuff, for putting a shrine to a mass shooter in his living room. To me, there's no, I don't understand. How would I even say that Hamas is worse? How would someone that
Yeah, so
chants death to
I have to
Jews?
say, that
Go ahead.
I kind of might be funny to say, but I kind of forgot about that whole picture of Baruch Goldstein's thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, here's the thing.
And that's probably the single most
Well, yeah,
influential thing on
but
how
here's
I'm
the
seeing
thing.
this concept. Go ahead.
Here's the thing. Within Israeli public, I believe that the percentage of people who are deeply worried by that is probably higher than the percentage who are deeply worried by that in the United States.
That's I could agree with that. That's why I'm not fundamentally
Yeah,
oriented towards the destruction of
yeah.
Israel,
So,
as
so
many insane leftists are.
yeah, so it's about, you could say, like, again, without getting specific into Ben Gvir and stuff like that. Most people in Israel hear his name and he's like the political devil to them. So I really can't see a situation in which the analogy that you've tried to draw with Germany comes to fruition unless he radically changes his not necessarily his beliefs, but what people perceive to be his beliefs.
Um, Benny Morris has stated, and this is, I believe, echoed by other people who are far more knowledgeable than me, maybe not more than you, but certainly me. Um, the birth rate in Israel is rapidly leaning towards the extreme, the much more religious Orthodox Jews that versus like the secular Israelis. So within 20 to 30 years, the proportion of much more religious Jews is going to vastly outweigh the secular Israelis. And some of those Orthodox Jews are in the Ben Gvir camp.
I have to. Okay, so you're
Go
saying
ahead.
something that's true. It's true that Benny Morris said that, but I'm going to correct you here.
Okay.
Um, this is also something that many people who talk about Jewish supremacy and stuff like that they miss. So this is a good chance to talk about this.
Okay.
There is a pretty big difference between the Orthodox Jews and the religious Zionist Jews.
Correct. There's Orthodox Jews that don't even believe in Israel,
Yeah, but these are a
which should exist.
minority.
Yeah,
Most
yeah.
Orthodox Jews, how should I say, they don't really give a shit. Like they're
That's fair.
like they would say, look, it doesn't matter if I worship God here, if I worship God there. I mean, it's nice to be here, but the Messiah hasn't come and the third temple hasn't been built, so we're just gonna keep doing our thing. So this is a group that's very different, and also you could say politically hostile towards the religious Zionists, which is a different, a new strain of, they wouldn't call themselves new, but the founder of the movement was lived about 100 years ago, and and this is more the movement that's, let's say, it has an overrepresentation in the settlements and stuff like that. But
Sure. And that specifically, this, when I say my criticism of Orthodox Judaism, and perhaps I should be more clear on this, that is the strain of Judaism that I'm most critical of. I don't have any problem with the minority of Jews who are not even in favor of Israel because they're not the ones lobbying for the United States to get involved in a war that, in my opinion, does not concern me as a U.S. citizen. So I'm concerned about the degree to which Judaism causes people to say the state of Israel has divine status of some kind, and therefore U.S. foreign policy needs to be oriented towards it in a special manner, which is like essentially the perspective of someone like Ben Shapiro, for example. So Ben Shapiro, I would consider a religious Zionist, even though he's not part of the religious Zionist party. right? So I'm
So here's
talking
a
about the underlying
question.
idea here. Go
Here's
ahead.
a question. If I were to say, let's ignore the geopolitics for a moment, although we can talk about that also later if you wish.
Sure.
Let's imagine if I were to say that I believe that that there is a special ethical significance to the state of Israel. Like I replace the word holy or sacred that you've used, replace it with ethical. Is that also a product of Jewish supremacy? Do you think?
Two things. I wouldn't. I want to differentiate because Jewish supremacy. I don't know whether I would consider Ben Shapiro a Jewish supremacist. His old tweets would certainly lean in that direction, but I don't believe in holding people accountable for that. But his current political views are suspect. Like Ben Gvir is a Jewish supremacist. Fine. Do I want to put Ben Shapiro in the same camp as that? No, because they're extreme. So the fundamental problem here is what terms like Orthodox Judaism, religious Zionism, maybe religious Zionism is the underlying concept here that's I'm concerned with, and then there's different variants of that. So maybe we
Yeah, because there are
religious
also
Zionism.
Christian religious
Oh,
Zionists, right?
absolutely. And the Christian Zionists are exactly as problematic, in my opinion, as the whatever. I don't think there's any Muslim Zionists, but you might
That
find
would
one or
be
two.
rich.
Yeah, maybe. So Jewish religious Zionism, Christian religious Zionism, whatever. Let's say religious Zionism, a religious justification for the political behavior of a state. I guess that's my fundamental problem. And so, what you just said about the ethical thing, it's like yes, that would be problematic too. Because why would be my question.
Why would it be problematic?
Well, why would someone say we have a special ethical consideration for Israel versus like England or something like that?
No, okay, but here's the thing. Okay, you could say there's special ethical consideration to Israel because Israel is actually mortally threatened. And it would be weird to say that about England when it might be true that there's an ethical consideration there, but it's not relevant at the moment because there's no problem with it. You know what I mean?
Sure, but couldn't you say the same thing about Palestine or Lebanon?
I
It's like,
would.
aren't they threatened by Israel?
So I would say that they are, but I would say that for many reasons that it's probably out of the scope of this discussion to have. That for many reasons the ethical consideration is on Israel's side. This is what I believe. But of course, it's not perfect, right? There are weaknesses here and there. But
Sure.
but while you were talking, I actually had another thought that
Yeah.
occurred to me. So you believe that religious Zionism is a problem,
Yes.
both on the Christian and on the Jewish side. You have
Absolutely. Yeah.
probably a couple of tens of millions of people around the world who are religious Zionists, both on the Jewish and the Christian side.
Yeah.
So here's my
And probably
question.
more Christians than
Yeah, that's why I
anything.
said several
Yeah.
tens of millions.
Yeah.
So here's my question, the thought that has occurred to me. Is it not equally problematic, in your opinion, if you were to discover that there are, say, about 1 billion religious anti-Zionists who are anti-Zionists for religious reasons? Because
Um,
that's kind of the truth, also.
so two things. First off, it depends on what we mean by Zionist and like depends on what you mean by Zionist and anti-Zionist. If by anti-Zionist you mean committed to the destruction of Israel,
Yes.
then yes, I would say that's very much problematic. If by anti-Zionist, like for example, I don't again, it's like pro-choice versus pro-life. It's like, well, I believe it should be up fine until the first trimester. So does that make me pro-choice or pro-life? It's like it's not, these terms. It's part of the fundamental problem is
No,
in terms of the
wait.
data.
I think that's actually. I don't think this is actually a problematic term because when I said that there are about 1 billion people, maybe more, who are religious anti-Zionists, what I mostly refer to is people who are Muslims And as part of their faith and creed, they believe that the state of Israel should be, well, basically annihilated. So is
Sure.
this not a bigger problem than a couple of tens of millions of people who believe that
So
the Jews should have?
As an American,
Yeah.
my tax there is no Muslim country that exercises the degree of influence over my country's foreign policy to even any shred of a degree
Yeah.
that Israel does. So from my perspective, that's why I consider the religious Zionism issue more concerning for me. Why are
Okay.
my tax dollars going to fund Israeli settlers in the West Bank?
Okay. Wait.
I'm very upset about that. Go
Wait.
ahead.
1 second. So we've actually moved. Oh, sorry. So we've actually moved into a different argument now.
Okay.
Okay. And that's okay. We can do that.
Yeah, which I'm all for. I'm very
Yeah,
flexible.
but we've discussed like the ethical implications of, well, the religious Zionists are a problem, and then I said to you, wait, then why aren't the religious anti-Zionists a problem? Because they are much more numerous, and
Right.
you could also say much more deadly in potential. And then you said, well, let's talk about geopolitics. Right?
Well,
This is kind of
you asked me why when you ask why I said the religious Zionists are problematic. The reason they're problematic from my perspective is because they lobby my government to get involved in foreign affairs that I do not believe they should be involved in.
okay.
That's my fundamental issue, right? Like I mean, if I'm stepping back from like a pure moral perspective, it's like, well, then we're adjudicating Islam versus Christianity versus
Yeah.
Judaism. That's a whole different thing. So the reason I'm even like willing to talk to you to state my opinions is because these are my opinions as for better or worse, we live in a democracy, and so my vote counts as much as any other experts
More
or
than
as an
mine.
actual expert. Yeah, exactly. So, I believe for better or worse, I don't. It's not like I said. We talked about at the beginning. I'm not trying to convince anyone. I'm just telling you what I believe and why I believe it. It's like I do not like the fact that my tax dollars are going to support um, settlements in the West Bank that I believe get in the way of Israel's security.
By the way, I believe that's not true. I don't think that the U.S. aid
Well,
is flowing in.
indirectly by the government condoning the settlements, which they overwhelmingly do, and they're continuing to do. So I'm speaking about. It's not like $1 from me goes straight to Ben Gavir's pocket, but the system it remains intact. Although there's another direction I could go down because it's like the relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia were normalizing prior to October 7th,
Mm.
right? So I do, and I take issue with this, acknowledging I know very little about it. And so I'm not saying you're wrong, and I'm just telling you what my resistance to the point you were making is. It's like because people say, yeah, Islam is fundamentally anti-Zionist, like you pointed out, right? It's like if that was the case, then how were relationships with Saudi Arabia being normalized? And how was it that prior to the existence of the state of Israel, Jews and Muslims lived in relative peace? At least that's my understanding of the narrative.
Yeah.
That could be wrong. But what do you think of that?
Okay. So a couple of things here.
Yeah.
Jews and Muslims lived in relative peace, relative to what was happening in Europe. Okay. It was not a good life. I believe the first thing that comes to my mind is that when people talk about, well, what a good life Jews had under the Islamic rule, they refer to Maimonides, like a famous Jewish philosopher who wrote in Andalusia, modern day Spain, that was under Islamic rule, and how, well, Jews basically thrived. And it's true that there were some times in history in which the Jews thrived. But the same Maimonides also had to flee Andalusia and to move and hide because of some things that he said or believed as a Jew. So
Okay, so let's say historically fine. That's fair. Saudi
yeah.
Arabia normalizing the
Okay,
relationship.
so about Saudi Arabia. Here's the thing. The Arab world is what I'm doing here also, by the way, is kind of justifying a part of the Palestinian and of the Muslim narrative, because it's partly true. Of course, everything is partly true.
Definitely.
The Arab world is essentially ruled by a bunch of dictatorships who are trying to retain their power while also getting the assistance that they need from the West and stuff like that. So the Saudis are in a problem here because the so-called Arab street hates Israel, hates the West, and all that good stuff. And but the Saudi interests, as in the House of Saud, right? That's why it's called the state. It's called Saudi Arabia because it's
Right.
ruled by the House of Saud. It's more important for the House of Saud to counter the Iranian rise than to deal with this. A couple of million of Jews who don't really bother them materially that much, only like ideologically. So this is the thing, and also it's in the United States very strong interest to have this sort of Israeli-Saudi defensive alliance because that would mean that they can leave the Middle East and divert resources away from it. So
That'd be nice.
yeah, so this is essentially what's going on there. I can give you like, okay, take Egypt for example. Egypt normalized relations with Israel in the late 70s. Uh, the Egyptian president, although I guess it's more accurate to say dictator in American terms, so the Egyptian dictator who did that was actually assassinated for it. Okay, and what happened when back in the Arab Spring, about a little more than 10 years ago now, when Egypt had democratic elections, who was elected? Basically, the Muslim Brotherhood, which is I guess you could call it a cousin to Hamas and Al Qaeda. Okay, so the Arab populace is quite ideologically different from the Arab leadership, and the West is trying to keep it that way because people understand what will happen if democracy were to really come to the Middle East. Like,
Yeah, I don't think it can.
yeah, I mean it can, but we know what will happen if it will. So it will be,
Sure.
like the West will not let this happen. And this is also part of the reason that the Islamists hate the West because they recognize this situation. So I can the narrative that I've given about the religious anti-Zionism does not really at all go head to head with the Saudi wishes to normalize with Israel.
Sure.
So this is
That's
my
fair.
answer to that.
Yeah,
But it's
that's fair.
dangerous. It's still dangerous because if Israel knows, and I guess the West knows, but Israel most particularly because it's most vulnerable because of its location. Okay, Israel knows what will happen if any of the dictatorial regimes in the Arab world, hostile as they may be, what will happen if they fall? They'll get another Islamic revolution, just like happened
Sure.
in Iran. So yeah, this is like my answer to that. Maybe it was a bit long.
No, no, no. That's fair. Um,
The U.S.
and
interests are not to have a single power dominate the region. That's essentially the U.S. interests.
well, but that power is Israel. Israel's
No,
the strongest military by far.
yeah, but it does not dominate. It does not dominate the region. Okay, let's put it this way. It does not dominate the important thing about the region, right? Because what are the important things about the region? Uh, the Suez
Suez
Canal,
Canal.
right? Which Israel really does not dominate. Okay.
Right.
The Persian Gulf, which Israel does not dominate. Maybe you could say the Straits of Bab el Mandeb, which Israel does not dominate. That's the Horn of Africa, also, which Israel does not dominate. It's actually
Black Sea.
dominated by the Houthis right now, which are hostile to the West, and they're attacking ships and doing all kinds of crazy shit. And they're an Iranian proxy, essentially. And the outflow of oil, which Israel does not dominate.
So then why, maybe this is the more important question. And I'm happy to if we want to because I know we're kind of I've probably diverted where you were
It's okay.
wanting to go.
We
We
can
can
talk
go
about
into
whatever.
yeah, we can go more into the religion thing or whatever. But again, the reason I even care about this topic to begin with is because I am an American. I have an obligation to vote for the leader that I think best represents American interests. in order to do that, I have to have an idea of what American interests are. And I do not understand why the United States should concern itself with Israel's security to the point of risking a war with Iran. So maybe you can elucidate why. You just gave all those reasons why Israel's not dominating any of those strategic points.
Yeah, it's
I don't
dominating
know.
militarily. It's the dominant. It's one of the dominant military powers of the Middle East. Yeah, that's true.
Sure.
But it doesn't dominate the Middle East in a sense that is detrimental to U.S. interests, right? Because it does not dominate the oil. On the contrary, it actually counterbalances against the dominant oil powers, which is Iran, you could say, right? And it
Is
is,
Iran? Isn't it
yeah.
Saudi and
Okay,
Kuwait?
okay. It's probably Saudi and Iran, but Iran
I'm
is,
sure
I
Iran.
think,
Yeah, that's right.
it's number two in oil production and number one in gas production, I believe. Iran. So
This is fair.
I guess number one would be Saudi Arabia or something like that.
Well, then, so the question I have for you is, and I'm not, I'm asking this in a challenging way, but I am open to hearing, is like, if you're if you're pro-Zionist, pro-Israeli, what is the case to an American? Why is it in my interest as an American citizen to support Israel to the point where, we would risk war with Iran?
Okay, so I think, okay, let's put the ethical and Western moral, all that mumbo jumbo aside for a second. Let's talk pure geopolitics for a second.
Sure.
So the main U.S. interest in the Middle East is to prevent a single power, and especially if it's a hostile single power, to dominate the region, from dominating the
Okay.
region.
Why is that in the U.S. interests?
Because that would create a very strong leverage to a single power, hostile power, that could affect gas prices and oil prices. But when I say gas, okay, when I say gas, I mean like literal gas, not gas that you put in your car.
Like natural gas.
Yeah, natural gas. Okay,
Yeah.
so it's a region that's very gas rich and it's very oil rich,
Sure.
and a single hostile power could spike prices and make lives for Americans worse. That's reason number one. Reason number two is that even if prices would not affect the American citizen at all, it's not true, but let's say that it is true, it would still generate substantial power in world geopolitics that would benefit the US's enemies, namely China and Russia, right? So if you were to have a hostile player dominating the Middle East that works in concert with Russia and China, that would be a problem for the United States' status as a world power, of course.
Okay. Let's step back because
This is,
yeah,
by
this
the
is
way,
the
the
air.
reason. This is the reason, by the way, that nobody cares about South Africa, like not the country, the region, right? Because there
Yeah.
really isn't anything there
There's
that's,
no geopolitical interest there. Yeah,
yeah.
and that's a sad, and like you said, we have to take the morality out of it because it's like we have to be brutally in the world of geopolitics. It's a pure power.
No, we can talk about some things that are not purely political, which I still believe are in the U.S.'s
Yeah.
interests. But let's not
Okay,
do that
sure.
now.
Yeah. Okay, so the your first point, the energy, it's in the US interest to not have a dominant power emerge because it threatens the energy prices. Well, this is one of the reasons why energy independence is such an important initiative in the United States. Like we have plenty with fracking, we've got plenty of
Yeah.
natural gas. We're a net exporter. So in my mind, if we did the nationalist thing to do, which I'm in favor of, which is focus on energy independence, that includes nuclear, that includes all these different things, that would take away the Dick Cheney reliance on, well, we're going to
It
go
wouldn't
involved
though.
in the
It,
Middle
it
East.
wouldn't
Okay. Why is
because
that?
okay, imagine. Well, the U.S. is already energy independent, right? But still, okay. So the U.S. is energy independent. Let's say that a barrel of oil costs $1, just for the sake of argument. Okay? But let's say that a hostile power has taken over the oil supply in the Middle East, and let's say that Saudi Arabia has watched Israel, which is essentially the Western coalition, capitulate to Iran, and that now it feels threatened by Iran, and it also becomes more and more subject to Iranian influence, which is subject to Chinese and Russian influence, obviously. And now they come to some conclusion that they will raise oil prices or maybe embargo the West or something like that, embargo Europe or whatever. Okay? Just for the sake of argument. Now, the US can sell a barrel of oil to Europe for $10 and not for $1. What will happen to gas price, to energy price in the US if that were the case? It doesn't matter if you're energy independent, right? It will still go up.
Sure, because the total demand goes up, but
Yeah, the demand goes up, and also the
I don't.
price goes up elsewhere. So why wouldn't you sell outside and make a profit and raise the prices overall?
Yeah, so I get that logic, and perhaps you're right. My suspicion is it's quite a bit more complicated than that. I mean, Russia's Nord Stream pipelines provide Europe's natural gas right now, and they're essentially almost at war. So the entire exchange of energy globally is more complicated, and I don't think it's just that simple. I get my other issue. I guess my more it's like first off, I'm not advocating that the United States treats Israel in as an enemy or treats Israel like Egypt or something like that. I'm
Egypt
like
is
for
actually the
example,
number two recipient of foreign aid, or maybe even number one
yeah, I don't
before.
even know, and I haven't looked this up, but I don't even know do U.S. naval vessels dock in Israeli ports to the same degree that they do in Egyptian ports?
Probably not. Not that I know of. Israeli ports are not that important if you really think about
Yeah,
it, right? This
they
this
probably
Suez
have
Canal
air
is
bases and
way
whatnot.
the Suez Canal is way more important if you talk
Right.
about.
So, what
But
I'm like,
but
go ahead.
I'll just add one thing. If Egypt were to come under like Islamic rule or hostile rule or something like that, because Egypt is true, it's an Islamic country, but the regime is secular. Like it's Muslim, but it's
Yeah,
relatively secular. So I guess if Egypt were to come under some Islamist rule, which could happen in the next 100 years, right? It's not very far fetched. It almost
yeah,
happened 10 years ago.
sure.
So if that were to happen, then the U.S. would probably prefer Israel dig its own canal from Eilat to Ashkelon, which are like I don't suppose you would know where that is in Israel, but you could have another Suez
Tip of the
Canal.
Dead Sea to
Exactly.
okay.
You could have another Suez Canal running through Israel. The problem is that if Israel were to do that, that would be very problematic for its relationship with Egypt because that would make Israel compete with Egypt in one
Yeah,
of its primary geopolitical exports, right?
sure.
But it could happen. Like, I mean, if Egypt were to become suddenly hostile to the West, although I can't see that happening because it's entirely dependent on U.S. foreign aid. They would literally
Sure.
starve. They would literally starve.
Tourism and all that, I'm sure, is
No,
one of
no,
their major
no. I'm
industries
not
too.
talking about tourism.
Yeah, no, I understand
Yeah,
foreign aid, but I'm sure also if I don't know if but if I guessed on Egypt's GDP breakdown, I suspect tourism is up there on its
yeah. But it's like
maybe not.
literally on the verge of starvation.
Sure.
Okay, but so but if U.S. support were to stop and if it were to become hostile and whatever, the U.S. would probably prefer that Israel dig a canal. This is
Sure.
like an
I guess
example.
it just Mike, so let me give you because I understand this logic. I'll give you the purely practical geopolitical position I have, and then you tell me why that's off or if it's problematic. Is this is my belief. And I believe that one of the biggest threats to Israel that it can control, because it can't control Iran's fundamental orientation towards its destruction. Fair enough. I don't blame you guys for getting into war with Iran. I don't want my little brother to be deployed and be killed on behalf of in that war. I don't think that makes sense as an American. Um, my position is the there are factions in the Israeli government that inflame tensions with the Muslim world. The the settler movement being the obvious one, the Third Temple movement, which I understand is fringe, but again, what is fringe now can very quickly degenerate into something that's not fringe. So I'm not discounting the fact that they are not as big of a threat right now. But like, for example, if the Al-Aqsa Mosque was destroyed, it's like, if Israel allows the Al-Aqsa Mosque to be destroyed, that's on Israel. And it's like, well, then you have a billion people who are against Israel. It's like you let the second holiest site in Islam get destroyed. It's like that is not smart. And there are people in Israel advocating for that to happen.
Okay,
The Temple Mount people.
I agree with you
Let me
here. It's probably not smart. Go on, sorry.
I'll just tie them there, and then you can poke the different holes in it.
Yeah.
So stuff like that, the settler movement, inflaming tensions with the Middle East, that puts Israel's security at more risk than it otherwise would be. And I do not like. And my if I was the American president, I would call up Israel, Bibi or whoever. No, I'd say fuck you, Bibi. Go to hell. And I'd talk to whoever the next.
Yeah, I know you don't
um,
like him.
no, I don't. Many
Yeah.
people don't.
Yeah. In
Um,
Israel too, but
yeah, yeah. Which is why I am not an insane leftist who thinks that Israel should be destroyed, because there's clearly reasonable people in Israel, and many of them do more good for the Palestinians than all the fucking virtue signaling college students who could give two shits what actually happens to those people. Anyway, I would call up whoever would listen in Israel and say, you have 30 days to drag every settler out of the West Bank, or we're shutting off your F-16s, because the United States can technically do that, because every day you have to install
yeah,
new code. I don't know if it's shutting off per se, but
you are
it's
shutting. Yeah, you can shut off.
yeah, 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 yeah. And that's an aggressive position, but I believe it's more important to say the rights of the settlers mean nothing to me. The claims that the settlers have in the West Bank mean absolutely nothing to me. And I would happily jeopardize those or infringe on those in order to bring tensions down broadly, so that relations with Saudi Arabia could be further normalized, and other countries to the degree that they can be. So that's my attitude from a practical policy perspective. It's like, what I think is at odds with US interests is continuing to give unconditional aid to Israel, which we essentially do. Biden said there were red lines, don't invade Rafah. It just completely ignored, right? In my mind, it feels like we're Israel's bitch, because we give clear red lines, and no matter what happens, my tax dollars go to Israel, and no matter who's president, they only fight over who supports Israel more. No one even talks about, well, who's constraining the more absurd settler movement-esque stuff going on in Israel that is inflaming tensions in the region to begin with. So my opinion is the United States should exercise conditions on aid so that that stuff stops. And then if they pull the settlers out, we say, okay, great. We'll continue to supply you bombs and weapons and all that shit, because that's a reasonable geopolitical exchange to have. It's like, you drag the settlers out, and we'll honor our promises and continue to supply missiles for the Iron Dome and all that stuff. I think we should do that. I do not think we should tomorrow see ya Israel and then allow Israel to get destroyed. I think that's wrong, and that's
So
immoral.
so let me try. Like, there are
Yeah,
actually quite a few Israelis who would agree with you.
I know. Listen, nobody loves Israelis more than I do. Okay, and
But I
nobody loves me as much as the Israelis.
yeah,
Go ahead.
but I here's what I'll try and do. I'll try to defend the settler
Yeah,
position,
please.
because I think more and more people are starting to come around to that position as well, to like defending the
Okay.
settler. So here's the thing. Let's not talk about what you refer to as Jewish supremacy and Jewish religion and stuff like that. Before the establishment of the State of Israel, why do you think that the all Arab, every Arab essentially, almost every Arab, and every Arab country certainly, went to war with Israel the second that it announced that it came into existence. Okay, now the borders of that Israel, they were not even the 67 borders. I don't know if you're aware, but it was like it was
Yeah,
smaller than
sure.
the 67 borders. So why do you think that is that they went to war immediately?
Well, it's a combination of reasons. Some more justified than others. Number one, they don't like Jews, probably. That's part of it. The other part of it that's far more reasonable and what I'm sympathetic to is why does the British get to decide to just create a
Yeah,
state out of thin air?
yeah, that's the
I'd go
narrative.
to that's an American.
Yeah,
I'd
yeah,
go to war if someone said, well,
yeah, that's the Palestinian narrative. But
yeah,
essentially, what I'm
Louisiana is
trying,
now,
yeah.
a Russian state. It's like, fuck that.
So what I'm trying to show here, yeah, you can justify that in the Palestinian perspectives. Certainly, that's the narrative. But what I'm trying to show is that the cause to violence is not necessarily the settlements. Okay, so that's number one. I do believe that actually, if there is a lot of tension that is coming out of the settlements, and of course everything that's going on in Al Aqsa. But here's another question to you: who is sovereign in Al Aqsa? Do you know?
Isn't it some sort of like international? It's like Jordan and
Yeah,
Lebanon
it's
have all have
Jordan.
like a
Yeah,
yeah.
it's the Jordanian, like some sort of Jordanian religious authority. Do you know that I speak to many Palestinians because of my Hebrew channel? That many Palestinians contact me. They won't come on this show because it's dangerous for them. But do you know that none of them essentially knew this fact? You know this, and you're an American. The Palestinians visit Al Aqsa and they don't know this. Okay,
Well, because in
the,
practice, what is the Jordanian sovereignty worth if Israel's allowed to fire flashbangs into the mosque? So
uh,
like like in paper, it's sovereign by Jordan, but Israeli police forces can go in and throw flashbangs in during
well,
worship.
do
So
you
who
know
really
what
owns it
the
then?
do you know the amount of trouble that this got? Like the Israel tries so hard. Like, do you know that Jews are not allowed to play to pray over there? Do you know that?
I believe, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, so like it's not exactly like the Jews can have a lot of complaints to the Israeli government regarding this. They say it's racist. Why am I not allowed to pray just because I'm Jew? Okay, so many like
Sure.
there are lots of ways to put this, and the Hebron massacre of 28, or was it 29? I keep forgetting. Way before Israel, it was essentially instigated by Arabs who believed that the Jews are undermining Al-Aqsa Mosque and stuff like that. So like all of these ideas that are like the cause of tension, they are not all necessarily linked to real Israeli action. Another example: um, how do you call a Jewish person living in Tel Aviv in Arabic? You call him a settler. Okay, you call him
Sure.
you call him a settler.
I get called a settler because
So
I live in America and we settled
yeah,
Native American land.
yeah, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Sure.
So the thing is, it could be argued, and I think it could be a sensible argument that it doesn't really matter that much today, like what the Israelis do. You're gonna pull out the settlers, people are gonna come for more. And this is a main Israeli concern. Now, we could obviously, well, I think this is a very good discussion, but we've been going for over an hour now.
Sure.
And I think we should maybe continue on your channel at some
Sure.
opportunity. So for now, we'll wrap this discussion up and maybe we can pick this up some other time.
Yeah, definitely.
So thanks for coming, Paul. I remind you guys, well, the YouTube channel is going to be in the comments. So thanks for coming on and see you another time.